Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you to our two in-person guests for making the trek out, and to our digital audience as well. We appreciate anytime we can get parents and community members to come in and learn more about what we're doing at the school. That always makes a huge difference. So thank you again for being here. My name is David Dustin. I'm the principal of Conant High School, Jaffrey Range Middle School, and we're here tonight to talk about two sort of related topics. One being our 1 to 4 grading system, which we've had a few forums about this year and have been working on for several years. But the focus tonight is about how that relates to the college admissions process as a post-secondary pathway for our learners. Joining us tonight, I want to say a welcome and a thank you to our 5 post-secondary educational institutions that are here. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves now to you and share which institution they have come from, starting with our in-person guest.
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Hennessy. I'm Assistant Director of Admissions here at Keene State College.
And then we'll move to the University of New Hampshire.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Rafferty. I'm the Admissions Manager and Campus Partner Liaison here at UNH.
Excellent. Thank you. University of Southern Maine.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Burton. I'm an admissions counselor here at the University of Southern Maine.
Thank you. University of Rhode Island.
Good evening, folks. My name is Becky Mulholland. I'm one of the directors in the Office of Undergraduate Admission at URI, and I'm joined by my colleague Diane Roadhamel, who is the liaison for your school.
Excellent, thank you. And Norwich University.
Hi, folks. My name is Jacob Rogensky, and I'm the Senior Associate Director of Admissions over at Norwich University.
Thank you so much. So again, I can't say thank you enough to our admissions representatives for being here tonight. This always means more coming from the folks who receive our learners after they leave us. And we know that you all have had long days and are committing some time to be here with us. So thank you very much. I also want to introduce the other members of the administrative team who are here tonight as well, starting with our Director of School Counseling.
So I'm Kim Baker, and I'm the Director of School Counseling for both the middle and high school.
Hi, I am Heather Schulman, Assistant Principal for Teaching and Learning, grades 6 through 12.
Hi, my name is Rachel Sami Leonard. I'm an assistant principal here, and I work with school safety and school culture.
Excellent. So we're all going to be here to answer some questions tonight, in addition to the college admissions reps who are here. I did want to provide a little bit of context before we jump into the question and answer session. And this is quick. We've been going over this for several years, so I would invite anybody who's joining us for the first time tonight or has other questions after tonight's presentation. I'm happy to answer those either through Zoom or in person, or we're always available for meetings about this topic as well. So the first thing I want to kind of circle back to is the journey started as our district explored the purpose of learning, and in particular, why we assign grades and what the purpose of those grades is in terms of supporting learning. And in our district, our philosophy is that grades exist for 3 major reasons. One is to provide opportunities for learners to attain and demonstrate their success. The purpose of a grade traditionally has been to rank learners and sort of label where they're at and leave them there. We believe that grades should provide avenues for growth. The second piece is to make sure that learners have a voice in the direction their learning can go by knowing what their knowledge and skills are at any given moment, specifically, and how they can then improve from that avenue. And the third piece is to provide accurate information on the skills and knowledge learned, both to inform learners about their pathways now, but also to inform them about what they can do to change and alter and improve the direction that their journey can go. This is not just a JRMS CHS situation, which is why, again, I'm sure you're not going to hear any surprises from our college admission reps tonight. I'm sure that they've heard a lot of these questions themselves. We are informed always in our practices by our NEASC accreditation body. NEASC is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Their 2020 standards align almost perfectly with our strategic design and include a focus on proficiency-based learning that provides personalization and customization. In addition, New Hampshire state law for about a decade now has required schools to consider demonstration of competency in the awarding of credits, not seat time, which is a pretty dramatic change that schools are continuing to try to process as time has gone forward. And the third piece is a large body of educational research that supports grading and assessing systems that improve learning and improve outcomes versus label and rank. So again, we're kind of in the same boat as many schools continuing along this journey. Really briefly, our journey so far and why this is the time to have this discussion with our college admissions representatives. Way back in 2017, our district embarked on a strategic design About 100 individuals from the community, school, parents, learners, businesses, post-secondary educational institutions in the community came together. And the key threads that came out of that were a push for a personalized approach to learning over time. And this required some substantial changes to the way we do business. That was back about 5 years ago in 2017. In the 18-19 school year, our focus was on really being more clear about the habits of work that are critical for post-secondary success and separating those from the academic grades so we can accurately assess and report on both those habits of work and the learning in the classrooms. So that was the big focus that year, as well as removing practice types of problems from bearing weight on the academic grade. And the 19-20 school year, straight up through this past school year, our focus was on rolling out a 1-to-4 rubric system that allowed learners to have a consistent proficiency-based scale of their learning. And those have been converted up until this year into a 0 to 100 grade and placed in Web to School. So we've had a slow journey so far. It's felt speedy at times, but we've been diligent and deliberate in trying to pace the scope of change in a way that we can kind of keep up on. This school year, and again, why this is the nexus point where we felt it was appropriate to bring in some college folks. This year, we've rolled out Otis to all but our science classes in this building. And we have even our report cards are now in a 1-to-4 system. So we're nearly universal in the reporting of standards and proficiency. Our report cards are still being converted this year in the final grades into a 0 to 100, but we're very close to what is going to take place next year, which is 1-to-4 transcripts for all of our middle level learners and underclass grade levels for next year. Starting next year, those grades will no longer be converted at all. Their transcript will simply reflect their 1-to-4 grade. So actually, we're going to stay on that last slide, Nick. And we're going to turn things now over to Kim Baker, Director of Counseling, and we'll jump right into our college admissions piece.
Great, thank you. I just want to echo what Mr. Dustin shared earlier. I can't thank our admissions representatives enough for being here with us tonight. I know that many of them are still traveling, receiving applications, reading applications, and many of them have visited us very recently and spent time with our learners. So I appreciate the fact that we have both in-person and virtual representatives here tonight to answer questions that we will be asking, but also answer questions that you may have, both for the people that are here with us in person, but also for those that have questions and are joining us digitally. So I just want to mention that we have a very collaborative relationship, and I appreciate that. It's a partnership between the school counseling department here at the middle high school and with our admissions representatives that are both with us here tonight, but also all of the admissions representatives that we work with throughout the college application process. So you'll have an opportunity to hear from them tonight. We do have a series of questions. We have 7 questions that we put together based on questions we've received from parents and learners about this process. So we'll take turns asking those questions to specific colleges. We'll also open it up at the end to some general questions that we'll be asking. And then our audience will have an opportunity to ask follow-up questions after that. So we'll just kind of jump right in with the questions and yes.
Yeah, this slide, that's a done slide. We can just close the slideshow down. We actually went a different route.
So I think we can bring up our admissions representatives on the screen. Mrs. Schulman will start us on.
I'll start with the first question. As a parent, the college admissions process can be quite overwhelming. I'd like to address the Keene State and Norwich University reps first. Could you answer this? What do you look for when a learner applies to college?
I'll go ahead and start, Jacob. So, you know, the most important thing, obviously, when we're looking at any student who applies to our institution, the transcript is extremely important, but it's not the only thing we're looking at. We're also looking at a letter of recommendation, likely from a guidance counselor, their school counselor, or a teacher. You know, that's also an important piece. We ask them typically to write an essay. So we like to see kind of who they are through that process as well. And then just the overall general application that should include, you know, what are they doing outside of the classroom, extracurricular activities? Do they have a job on campus or a job? You know, what kind of it's not just the application or the transcript that we're looking at, although that is very important. Because we do want to make sure that they will be able to succeed, with our curriculum, depending on what program they may go into.
Thanks, Steve. And I just want to piggyback too off of what Steve is saying too, is that we really try and take a holistic approach to the application process when we're reviewing a student for admission to Norwich University. And so even when we're talking about the transcript itself, we're not only looking at whether or not, how proficient a student is within a subject and what grades they're receiving, but also the level of coursework that they're taking. So if they're taking honors coursework or college prep course, we also use that to determine an admissions decision for a student as well. So ultimately, our goal is to ensure that a student is prepared for the major that they're applying for. And so different majors may have different academic criteria, and there may be certain courses that we're looking for a student to be more proficient in. But at the end of the day, what we're looking to ensure is that a student's taking the right coursework and they're taking college prep level courses, and that they're prepared for that next step for the college environment.
Thank you very much.
So the next question that we often get at the school that we felt could be best answered in this forum is looking at how colleges view schools or school districts that use a different approach, like a 1-to-4 system versus 0 to 100. So we'll ask the University of New Hampshire and University of Southern Maine reps to answer this question. When you have your selection process, how do you compare school districts that utilize a 1-to-4 grading system with those that still use a traditional 100-point system?
I guess I can go first on this one. So the answer really is we don't think anything differently of a school that uses that traditional 100-point scale, or they're using standards or competency-based scales. We don't think of them as any different, or like one is worse than the other. And I think, when you think about even like 100-point scale, it's not a monolith. There's 100-point scale at school A might be different than the 100-point scale used at school B. So even within that space, there's a lot of discrepancy and difference between schools. So like I said, it's not like we think down upon one model over the other. We kind of take it all in. We don't want to ever disadvantage a student. So we kind of look at a high school within the context, a high school within the context of that high school and what they're doing to assess a student's application.
Yeah, I'll just echo exactly what he said, as well as just, we don't compare in that way. We work with schools all across the country and overseas. So we're seeing a wide variety of different, coursework and standards-based versus 100-point scale, which is exactly why we have territory managers as well as like school liaisons, whatever each university calls it. I'm the one for this high school, so I spend a lot of time looking at school profiles, understanding how each school works on their own. And if we have questions, we reach out directly to the counseling offices. So we're very much taking a hands-on approach to work closely with the schools that we're reviewing, rather than, judging a student based on what their school chose to do. We think, nothing different of either types of scales.
And if I could just jump in for a minute, I think that's one of the things that's so nice about building relationships, because many of the admissions representatives work with our learners over many years. We get to know them, they get to know us, they get to know our learners, our coursework, what's offered to them. So when they're seeing our transcripts, they're already familiar with what our expectations are here, what our classes mean. And so I think that's really important to point out. So that relationship between the counseling office and the admissions office is so important, and I appreciate that collaboration.
Thank you.
So this next question I have, I'd like to have URI and Keene State have the ability to start us off. My question is, can you tell us about the wide range of transcripts that you see?
Yeah, I can start off. I mean, we just kind of talked about that a little bit. I think Brian touched on it a little bit. We see a 4.0 scale, we see competency based, which doesn't give any kind of a grade. It's just kind of a paragraph of how that student's doing. We see 100-point scales. I mean, we see them all. We see a 5-point scale. We see an 8-point scale. There's a very wide range. And again, just identifying what that is for each school and as a case manager for, any particular geographical territory or however a school does it, You'll get familiar with that process and how that works, to make sure that, and to really understand what that student's, competency is in that particular subject.
Sure, and hi, this is Becky from the University of Rhode Island. So I'm happy to weigh in a little, and I've been listening to the answers of my colleagues here, which is great. I hope we can address kind of all the thoughts and concerns or questions. As everyone has said, there's a wide range. I have the pleasure of overseeing the entire read for the University of Rhode Island for all undergraduate programs. And I think a couple of the questions that if I were working with your parents directly, I think it's important to understand which universities recalculate GPAs. That can certainly bring a little bit of clarity to looking at which schools may need a little bit more discussion of this particular standard of evaluation. In our case, we do recalculate GPAs, and many universities nationwide do. And essentially what that does is we try to level the playing field for students coming from all types of pedagogies. So we will see those proficiency-based transcripts, we'll see the numeric, the weighted, those that are specific for divergent learners. But it's a matter of trying to put folks on a level playing field. And so for the guidance offices, they tend to do a really great job providing us the background information on how they evaluate their students. The state of Vermont has gone through a lot of these transitions as well lately, and their schools have certainly asked us as well, providing as much information in advance so that the individual evaluating those applications knows, what the standards are. That can certainly help. I will say separately from admission, schools evaluate scholarships very differently, looking at things around how these grading schemes exist. I won't go too deep into that, but I would say as prospective parents moving forward, that would be a second question I would ask universities if you are looking at them, is how they evaluate scholarships, and does this come into play when they are looking at merit-based awarding?
Thank you. The next question is for University of Southern Maine and URI. Do you have some experience with standards-based grading systems and the transcripts? And how does this impact the admissions?
Yeah, so I can go first. But like I said, we work with a wide variety of different schools across countries in this nation. So I've seen a lot. I'm a newer counselor, and even in my first few months reading, in the first big app reading season, I've already done some reviews using those standards-based versus 100-point scale. So it's definitely something that we do review. And we really just look at it the same way, communicating with the counseling office. The school profiles are really helpful, which they'll provide us, as I mentioned. But we also do not recalculate GPAs, as Becky mentioned, some schools do. So we very much use what's provided to us. And if we need clarification, obviously get it. But our merit award is pretty typical with standards-based awards as well. So it's definitely something that's built right into how we review applications. And it's not something that we even really bat an eye at. We just do our best to, help students and help parents as they have questions.
So I have the next question. I'm actually going to open it up to anybody who would like to respond. And you've already touched on this a little bit earlier in some of the other questions you answered. You mentioned the school profile, and the school profile is something that each high school puts together each year that talks about the grading system, the percentage of learners that are going on to college from the previous year, average testing scores, information about the different levels of classes we have. So just maybe if anyone would be willing to talk about how you use the school profile, why it's important, what type of information you'd like to see in the school profile, that would be helpful for us, and I think for learners and parents to know about.
Just speak quickly about this to get us started. I was actually speaking with a school counselor earlier about this with our nursing program and the requirements for courses that we look for our nursing program. And I think this example fits in really well here, is that often schools, regardless of, four-year college going rate and, information about the school, it also usually offers a listing of what courses are offered, which gives us an idea of what courses students have the opportunity to take as part of their course curriculum at any given high school. And so we were talking about the nursing program and some of the course requirements. And so the conversation came up because the school said, we don't offer anatomy and physiology 1 and 2 as part of our course requirements, and how do you look at that? And so that's great. I appreciate you bringing that up. We look at some of the other requirements, so like biology and chemistry, to ensure that you have the right scores in your science grades. And they also did their mathematics as an integrated maths course, as opposed to a geometry, algebra 2, algebra 1 course load. So it gave us an opportunity to talk about, well, that really is the importance of looking at the school profile to identify what types of courses are available to students and how that may be different than what the requirements may be for an admissions process, so that we can partner with those school counselors to ensure that students have the opportunities to take the courses that they need, or otherwise, so we're reviewing appropriately based on the courses that students have access to.
Would anyone else like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can just kind of jump off on that. I think the school profile really allows me, and I'm sure my colleagues as well, to really understand the context of the high school. I think Jacob says, like, certainly said it very well with, you know, understanding what courses are being offered at a school, because I know our goal in UNH is to never, you know, penalize a student for something beyond their control. So if we ever like have a question or something looks a little different than maybe the, you know, the quote unquote standard, we can go to that school profile and kind of like look up that answer, as well as reaching out to the counselors. The grading scale is an important piece on there. So I think it's just it's a very important document to help us, you know, make sure that we are, you know, reading a student within the context of their school and really understanding that fully.
Thank you.
So our last question before we turn it over is kind of it's an interesting one that we get a lot when learners who are used to doing extra things to earn 100 or an A+ or whatever in a traditional system, they find themselves earning a 3, which is rated as proficient in this system. And so sometimes there's a concern that a college admissions official might see 3s and say, well, this individual is not ready for college. So our question kind of goes to that. And again, we'll open it to anybody. If you see on a learner's transcript and you have all the information about the courses available in the school profile, if you see that they've consistently scored 3s in highly rigorous courses, how does that impact how you view that learner's readiness for admission to your school?
So I'm happy to weigh in on this, at least from our standpoint, and then more broadly. I think, and you know, this is why developing a strong relationship with your school counselor is critical. Understanding what your student may excel at, what might be a challenge, but a healthy challenge, right? That's what we're looking for. We like a healthy challenge. What we are certainly concerned about is if we see a student who consistently has struggled, and I would say, you know, a 3, a few would be fine, but I personally would not want to see a student necessarily moving through that same level of coursework if they're always getting a 3. We would want to maybe shift them a little bit to see if they can achieve a higher level of proficiency and depth of knowledge at a little bit lower level, still college prep, would actually be a better system to set that student up for success when they get in the college classroom, right? So sending somebody, and I'll use a traditional scale, through an AP course, but they struggle throughout that entire course. Not only is that not great for the student themselves, right? Their confidence, their knowledge is really not where we want it to be. But again, that's not setting them up for success in the college classroom. So we want to know that they've gained that knowledge, and moving to this competency-based, proficiency-based piece. That's the benefit of it, right? Is that we can evaluate if these students have really retained that knowledge. Can they apply it in the classroom, in the practical sense? We want to see that whole piece to it. So if I were talking to a family or a school counselor, they had come to us and said, hey, we have this great student. They've consistently earned a 3 in their math trajectory. Do you recommend that they do this higher level or this standard college prep? I would immediately say the standard college prep. That is for the University of Rhode Island. I can't speak for others. But again, I think you align a little bit better, and then the student builds their confidence as well.
I think, like, building off that, I don't have too many specifics in terms of what I would expect from students, but just we do again do the holistic review, which I think is important to mention. And one thing that USM specifically looks at is the trajectory, which Becky kind of mentioned. So just looking at with those 3s, if they are challenging themselves, how that challenge is going. or if they're, getting 2s in those classes and then go even, harder or in a more difficult area, that's something that we're concerned about. So just kind of looking at how the student does over time. And if they are consistently getting those 3s, how they might, be able to build better, I guess. And maybe that is, again, going down still in college prep, but trying something out. I think it's very specific based on how the student trajectory goes on that transcript specifically.
So, and I appreciate that feedback. I think it goes back to building those relationships, as you mentioned. There are been times in the past where we've had those same questions on guidance and we've reached out to the admissions offices at the colleges that the learner is looking to apply to, or when they want to make a change to a course and getting that feedback. And also, I think it speaks to the importance of having our learners take advantage of meeting with representatives when they come to the school to ask those questions, to talk about the coursework they've done, to have a better understanding of what colleges are looking for. And doing that earlier in junior year is also really helpful. So I appreciate that feedback. So before we open it up to our audience for additional questions, is there anything else that any of our admissions representatives would like to share? Or a question maybe that we didn't ask that you were hoping we would ask, that you, or information that you think would be helpful for our families and our learners to know about? Are we ready to jump into additional Q&A? Okay, so Nick Handy will talk about that process.
Yeah, so this is Nick Handy. I'm not on camera because I'm behind all the equipment. But so we have 2 different audiences tonight. We have both our in-person audience and we have our remote audience. Just want to go over how you guys can both make a comment or a question. Those in person, I do have a microphone that I can hand over to you guys. I'll ask that you speak into it because that will give the panelists the ability to hear, and will also obviously give those virtually the chance to hear. Those of you who are virtual, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pull open the chat window and bring it over so that I can see. Moment. And what I'm going to do is you have 2 different ways that you can make a comment if you are remote. The first way that you could, and probably the easier way for you, would be to use the participant window. And what you would do is you would raise your hand. What that would allow me to do would be to give you the ability to speak. We could then hear you in the room, and also the panelists could hear you. You could ask your question that way. You also are free to use the chat feature if you want. If you type a question in there, I can just read it out loud for those to hear, and we can go from there. Maybe what we can do is we can start with the people physically in the room. We can give the online audience a chance to kind of accumulate up, and then if we want to go back and forth at that point, we can. So I guess first up, does anybody in here have a question that they'd like to ask? Okay. So we can get the microphone ready.
Yeah, come over there.
Okay. All right, just want to test this out. All right, we're good.
Thank you. Okay, so and everybody, I don't know if this is doing anything. Maybe it is.
It's
on the
on the
receiving end.
internet too, then,
Okay.
yeah. It's always awkward.
So this is my daughter this is her first year after being in a private school for 3 years. So this like a deer in headlights. So, and this might be a question more for you, Mr. Dustin, after. So if it is, just stop me and say we can talk about that after, because I don't want to use up the time. But to me, being a parent, again, this might come up later with Otis, Web to School. It's all very overwhelming. And I think my concern is mostly the translation piece. Like it seems like to take this information from how it used to be, the A, B, C, D, F, or 1 through 100, and then convert it from 1 to 4. And then there were the work habits when my daughter was in 6th grade. That was a thing. So I kind of understand that and how it's separated. But my concern is, are we changing all of this for the topic of colleges? Is this why we're moving to this 1 through 4 grading system? Or is this starting in the middle school, high school level throughout? so that it's easier for college? What's the purpose of it, I guess? And again, this has probably been discussed, but
Yeah.
I feel like I'm like, 1 through 4, I'm a beginner at this.
Yeah.
So again, I think the big concern to me is just the different avenues of Otis, of web to school. Science is on web to school. Again, this is like probably separate
this-
from the college admission part, but
It's all related. And
so I just, it's confusing. It's confusing to take the information and try to decipher it when there's a couple different avenues and some information's in there. And I know you're probably working towards being all on Otis. But again, by way of college admissions, hearing all the different ways that the information is taken and broken down, is there room for error? Because it seems like it's like speaking in a foreign language and it's got to be deciphered and translated a couple different times. So I know that like lumps in a lot of stuff, but.
So I guess a few things, and then I'll of course turn it over to the admissions reps to add their perspective as well. We're meeting with this group tonight because the biggest concern that parents often have about any changes to how we assess, grade, and then store learning is how that impacts opportunities after high school. Most families don't care all that much about what the grades look like during school, because ultimately they're doing that for what comes next. So part of why we invited this group to be here tonight is because we're at that stage where we're about to do that final tipping point, and it will only be the 1 to 4 transcript. So we want families to have an opportunity tonight to hear from these folks. And it's been a very consistent message. I've apologized to our reps for the repetition of you having to tell us about the individualization of looking at the whole package of learners and meeting with CAP. It's been consistently the same message because we wanted families to hear that as well directly from these folks, that whatever we end up doing is not going to impact the process for our learners, as long as the way we do it continues to accurately and fairly report learning. So that's why this process is happening tonight. The purpose for the shift, and you'll see this when you get the report cards in the mail, they just went out today, so they should be landing in mailboxes, depending on the postal service in the next couple of days. What you'll see from the parent lens is a lot more information about how your child is doing. So under a traditional 0 to 100 system, you'd get a 78 in a class, and that's all you'd see. World history, Mr. Dustin, 78. That doesn't tell you or the college folks anything except that learner has a C. And what does that C mean? As we heard, the college has already tried to unwind that to level the playing field anyways, but for our purposes of knowing where a learner might need to change a course level, where they might struggle with a particular skill, where we can provide more support, that C doesn't give any of that information. What you'll see when you get your Otis report card is the 1 to 4 grade, which will tell you exactly what it means: mastery, proficient, developing, or not quite there yet. But below that is all of the skills and knowledge that have been looked at this term and exactly where your learner is performing on each of those. So if your learner has a 3 in a class, that's good, they're doing well, but maybe below that you see that the skill of, understanding, complex polygons, they've only scored a 1 in that skill. You'll know exactly where that learner is struggling. So at home, you know where to develop some more support, but so our staff knows that as well. And that's the goal of this change, is to do a better job of capturing the specific skills or knowledge that a learner is thriving in versus where they need more support. So we can intervene a lot earlier and say, maybe you shouldn't take this AP course. Let's focus on this area for now. Or you're getting 4s in all of these skills. It might be time to bump it up and do something a little bit different so you're more ready for college.
And what would it take to get a 4? And I assume that the teachers, because that was one of my concerns, switching from a Christian-based curriculum to coming here where she got all straight A's. What does that transfer to here? And so I don't know what it would take to get a 4.
Yep.
And that was my concern, is what if she's doing really well? What if she's bored? How would something like that measure? Would she get a 4 because she understands all those?
So there's a rubric
Criteria.
that accompanies this, and you'll see it on the first report card. I think that will really help because it does paint a really clear picture. But the analogy I've given to some learners who have said, I really don't get this, why I have a 3. First, I always say, talk to the teacher, because they can talk you through, like with any grade, they can explain exactly what they saw. I don't necessarily know that. But the analogy I give is when you look at the process of learning to drive, for example, So that always connects with high school learners because they're often doing that. If you're at a level 1 and you're learning to drive, you might be able to recognize that that's a car, but if you get in that car, you're not going to know what to do. You don't know how to operate it. It's just foreign to you. You know it's a car, you know it can drive, but you don't know how to do it. That's a level 1. A level 2 is that the teacher is sitting next to you in the seat and they're talking you through and processing with you. And as long as they're there, you're able to drive the car with their direction. That's a 2. A 3 would be, I get in my familiar car that I've learned on. It's my car. I'm so comfortable. I can drive this car by myself. But if you put me into this SUV or this truck or this minivan, I'm lost. I don't know how to transfer that skill. I don't know how to make this work. I'm at a 3. I'm good in my own car on my own. A 4 is, I don't care what vehicle you stick me in. I can transfer what I know about driving my car into all of these other cars. And heck, I could probably teach my younger sibling when it's time. So when I give them that analogy, they start to understand that that level 4 isn't just, I did all my work and I did a great job. It's that I'm transferring the knowledge from what I learned here into other types of disciplines, other scenarios, and I'm doing it independently, consistently. That's really what a 4 says. And if you can teach somebody else whatever it was in a different context, that's usually a good sign that you're at a level 4. It's a high bar, but it's supposed to be a high bar. Those have been great questions. I really
Yes.
appreciate it.
So if you don't achieve a 4, are you then lumped in with another group of students that are all getting 3s and there's a large range of competency within that group of students?
I think it depends on what the scenario is for that individual learner, because in any given quarter, there might be between 3 and 6 or 7 learning goals assessed. So your overall grade could be a 3.5 or a 3.7 or something. You could be doing very well overall, but you might have specific skills within that group that fell into that 2 or 3 range. That's not something necessarily that our college admissions reps would see on the transcript because they only see the final grade, but the diversity of why you had that final grade would really depend on those individual learning goals. What we've been seeing is that in some of our higher level courses like honors and AP, you're getting a lot of the same breakdown that you might get with the 0 to 100 system. A lot of learners getting 4s, some getting 3s, and those who are falling really below that are maybe making some decisions to go back into a CCP or honors level class.
And then the other question I had is, how do you calibrate the grades that you're giving out here with what the colleges are expecting, or how they interpret what a 3 means?
Mhm.
In particular, you mentioned, what if you have a student that's used to getting, doing extra credit and getting A's or 100s or whatever, and now in this new system, they find themselves getting a lot of 3s. So we're talking about an A student getting 3s. And then Becky from URI said that, well, geez, if a student's getting a lot of 3s, that doesn't look very good.
So I'm going to let our college reps answer that piece. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Becky, but I think what you had said was if you're seeing a pattern of that in a high level course,
Yeah.
it might be a sign to step into a different level and really focus on getting to level 4 first. So I don't think that it's necessarily bad to have 3s. It's just bad if that's all you have consistently. I think part of what, and again, I'll turn it over to the reps to answer the college question. Part of what we're attempting to do is be better at knowing when learners have learned and when they haven't. And doing extra credit to get 100 doesn't show that you've learned anything if the extra credit is something like bringing in a box of tissues, which has happened in the past at every school. In the middle schools, it was common to say, if you bring in these extra supplies, it's 10 bonus points. Or if you get this signed in time, you get extra credit. That doesn't have anything to do with measuring what you know about math or reading or writing, but it does inflate the grade and make it appear that way, which creates issues on the other side when we have applications going on to college. So our goal is to do a better job reporting that early and knowing where learners are succeeding or where they need extra support so we can intervene much sooner than 12th grade to make adjustments. That's why nothing we're doing is going to impact transcripts or anything for learners who are above 9th grade at this point. But I'll turn it over to these folks to talk about that college admissions piece.
Sure. So I'm happy to weigh in a little bit. And again, individually, more than happy to have a conversation about this. But I think, we are seeing when we look at our national pool of individuals where they're applying from what schools are, I will say this is more prominent in New England. And so, and in particular, the northern states of New England, you don't see it as much down in the Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts areas. But as we see more schools moving to this, I think we've definitely garnered some best practices. And so I mentioned this before, but I think having an incredibly engaged guidance office is is critical. We've seen it be implemented and be challenging for the college admission process, working with some of our partners in other states. And then we've seen it implemented and be absolutely successful for the students. The key is that communication piece and being able to articulate it in the school profile, working with those departments. As some of the colleagues here said tonight, sometimes it's an individual counselor, but as someone who oversees all of our off-campus recruitment for the university, I will say there's usually a point person who those guidance offices can speak to and really have an in-depth conversation about what works for that institution. And if your particular student is applying to a school outside of the immediate region, that's where there's potentially a little bit of legwork. It's not that your student is at a disadvantage, but I will say that I think, having been with many other universities as well, it's that school office, guidance office, working closely with the college admission offices to understand what is the difference between the 3 and the 4. These are big ranges, so it is challenging sometimes. When these students get to Common App, we'll see what happens between now and then. We have many, many cycles to go. But Common App, which, you know, there's over 1,000 schools on, does have a conversion factor. It's self-reported. So the school guidance office working to understand how are those students going to indicate their grades in the self-reported scores. That would be one of my children laughing in the background, sorry, as Bluey is on. But I think it's one of those factors where, again, it's the open communication. I'm so pleased to see that you're having an open forum, because we have seen schools transition and not engage the community in it, and it is challenging. So your question is 100% valid. It's always a little painstaking to go through this process. It sounds like you're implementing it slowly over time so that the students can start to learn and families can start to learn what types of questions to ask. So again, I could go on at length of this, having worked with many of the schools that have gone through these transitions. It's about knowing your audience in the college admission process. Some of the really competitive programs, it may take an extra letter of recommendation from that school counselor to articulate how the grading scheme works at your specific school. You know, there's a lot of things that your guidance office can do to help support your students, and those come through in the evaluation process. Without those, some schools, it can be challenging for them to understand where that student fits.
And do you want to talk, Mrs. Baker, about some of the work that your team is already doing to support some of that? I mean, even without any transition for grading, how you work with seniors with some of those college admission pieces?
Yeah, so we definitely, we do a senior meeting, and actually we're doing more communication with our juniors too. So kind of extending and bringing that down and bringing our juniors into that conversation around plans for after high school, because it's not just about the traditional college setting either. We want to make sure that our learners are prepared, whether they're continuing their education at a community or four-year school, a career training program, even other, we actually get requests for transcripts from places of employment too. So making sure that we are being clear and consistent and working with our learners, making sure they understand the requirements at each of the schools that they're interested in, making sure that they have an understanding of what's on their transcript and what that means. And so this is not a new conversation with our learners. I think it will shift and change from, okay, you have an 86 and now you have a 3, or you have, you know, so I think it's just the conversation and helping them transfer. But I have to tell you, there are many times, and I think some of the people on this call would know that we've reached out to admissions. So, you know, what would you recommend this learner take their senior year? Or we want to make some changes to the transcript. We don't offer these courses, but we offer these. So help guide us in this. So it is that open communication. And I think that's something that we do both with our learners, with our families, but also with the our community partners, which are all of our admissions counselors. We know that New England schools look different than colleges that are out west. So we have to pay attention to that. That's our job as school counseling team, is to be on top of that. We visit the college campuses. We're engaged with that whole process, and then we share that information with our learners and with our families. To the point where, maybe you get sick of our weekly emails, senior year saying, here's some reminders, here's some information, this is what's helpful, this is what, how we can help guide you. I don't know if that really answered what you were hoping, but we're in constant communication with our seniors. I think the biggest takeaway for you is make sure they're checking their email, check your email. That's how we communicate and let you know what's going on. So yeah, I really appreciate the partnership that we have with our college admissions rep. And I always say this over and over again. I do not hesitate to pick up the phone. I did not hesitate to reach out to all the reps that are here tonight and say, would you join the panel? And I can't tell you how quickly they responded. Sure, we'll join, no problem. We're happy to come and talk about this. They want to help our learners be successful. They want our learners on their campus. Our learners have been successful. We've seen that. So I appreciate that.
I think another important thing I'd add is that our philosophy around learning and scoring and assessing doesn't allow for one and done kinds of grades for any of our courses or standards. So any learner who scores a 2 or a 3 has the opportunity to go back to their teacher, have a conversation, engage in additional learning, and attempt the assessment again. And so with that in mind, it's also feasible and does happen where learners score a 3 and go to the teacher and say, what do I need to do to achieve a 4? Help me understand the criteria. And then they're able to attempt that assessment again and perhaps get a 4 if they've demonstrated what's needed there. So again, that's an important piece of this. It's not a one and done type of a system, meaning a learner who is accustomed to getting A's still has every opportunity to work hard, get some additional support on those particular skills and earn a 4.
I think it's all like head games or mind, how it's perceived by the kids. Because to be honest, I think my daughter is overwhelmed and I got a 3, I got a 3, I got a 3. How this is ridiculous. I did this. And it seems like she could be the high end of the 3, and then someone who's the low end of the 3, she's seeing it as though she knows she's tried harder and she's lumped into that same pool. She's competitive. So I think it's hard for her. And again, this is new. This is a new year for us. And the retakes, I'll take this outside this meeting because this isn't, I don't want to use up the time for the college admission stuff, but I'll talk to you guys later.
And I think when you receive the report cards, like
it might make more sense.
It was really exciting because it gave us a lot of information where our students are doing well. I mean, we were helping to print them and put them in envelopes, and I'm like, wow, this is really exciting. Because even as a school counselor, a teacher, an administrator, it really did provide you with more information. How can I better support this learner?
Yeah, it could translate better on paper,
It's really, in having the work habits, it was really, I mean, I had to remind myself that I was stuffing the envelopes, like I wanted to spend more time with them. And so that led me to Otis and, kind of looking at that. So I think that will be helpful to see that when you receive that. I also will say that, we will continue to have conversations with our college representatives for looking for sample profiles or sample transcripts and getting that information. Like this is just the beginning of the process. And so I appreciate some of the information that we heard tonight, because this isn't just helpful to you as parents and learners, it's also helpful to us to hear what our schools are looking for. How can we make sure that not only are our learners taking the classes and being successful and doing what they need to do to be good admits to those colleges, but how can we make sure that we are sharing the information that admissions counselors need to be able to make those good decisions for our learners. So we'll continue to get that feedback and to partner. So that's a warning that you'll get more emails from me. As your thank you for coming here, I'll probably be asking for some additional information and guidance in that process. So that's that continued partnership that we have. So I think the counseling department is kind of like in the middle between it's a good place to be, to help support our learners and our families, but also to make sure that our colleges or any place that our learners are going have the information they need.
Can I add something that I've just I grew up in a standards-based system. I actually was the class at the switch. So I totally relate to a lot of these feelings of fear, and I was a high achieving 3, I think you can call it. But I think it's looking at 3 as a success and not necessarily always as like a negative. And for that competitive student that I relate to very dearly, those conversations of, okay, I got a 3, how can I do better? Those can translate into recommendation letters and references. So if they are someone who feels like they had those conversations or they are pushing themselves, that could be a great teacher to, ask if they would write a reference letter, because we read those. This holistic approach isn't just holistic looking at the entire transcript, but looking at those recommendations, looking at extracurriculars and that type of thing. So we do read those. I can speak for USM. We read them very carefully. Anything you send us, we look at. And so that might be an area that can provide some comfort, as someone who is definitely can relate to these fears about that. But seeing those students challenge themselves, whether it's taking that college level classwork and getting, or college prep level classwork and getting 3s, and then eventually getting a 4 on the next year or whatever it may be, we look at all of that. So recommendations can also be a great place that students can not explain anything, but just emphasize that they are really trying to get those grades.
Yeah, if I could add to that, this conversation reminds me a lot of when many Vermont public high schools switched over to a proficiency-based system. And I think for a lot of high school parents, that conversation was very daunting and very confusing from families. And so, in many ways, this reminds me of that. And so what I just want to add to the parents in the room and online is that as the admissions counselors look for their specific caseload, the admissions counselors specifically who work with Conan in this case, we also will reach out to Conan too if we have any questions too, or if there's something that doesn't make sense to us. The impetus isn't always on Conan to tell us what's going on, but also I know for many of my colleagues here, we will check in with our school partners to ensure that we understand the scale correctly, so that we're appropriately applying that to the standard that we're looking for all of our students.
Definitely the same for us. I actually talked to 2 schools this morning, so it's happening regularly, and that was all me calling. So definitely can help calm some of the fears there as well.
And this dialogue about how to help learners continue to make that push to get to a 4 is not unique to parents. It's vexing sometimes to teachers to figure out what's going to be the hook to encourage and motivate that continued growth. Just today at our staff meeting, we had a very robust discussion with learners who are saying, well, in some cases, even I got a 2, it's good enough for me, I'm passing. And how do we continue to develop them and say, but you can do more, you're capable, let's continue the instruction. And the same thing happens sometimes when learners score a 3. They'll say, well, a 3 is great, I'm proficient, I'm happy. And that's fine, but that also allows the teacher to think of strategies that can continue to grow that learner's skills, and sometimes reach out to families or the counselors and have that conversation. I'm worried this learner really is on a college track, but they're shutting down and saying, I don't want to do anything else because I got a 3. How can I motivate them to continue to do some of that work? So it is a holistic conversation even around that when it comes to keeping learners growing and developing in their learning, which is good. That's what we want to see happening.
I know we don't have the microphone, but is there a numeric system that translates to what a 1, 2, 3, 4 is somewhere?
In the current, so for this school year and frankly, last year, teachers were using 1 to 4 rubrics for 2 to 3 years now in some cases, and they've consistently made conversions. That chart and at the half point level is published in our program of studies and was approved by the school board. So you'll see in there that a 3 translates in the current 0 to 100 system as an 86, for example. So that's already been happening again, because we've been in this system for a little while. The big difference is going to be going into next year with next year's incoming 9th grade and below, where they're only having 1 to 4 grades and there is no translation. That's when when increasing sort of the school profile in terms of what that means is going to be even more important, because there won't be a 0 to 100 translation to rely on. But again, that will not impact any current juniors, any current seniors. We're very sensitive to the fact that those individuals have been developing. They're already well on their way to their path towards whatever's next. Their transcripts are going to continue to look the same, continue to have 0 to 100 grades. Nothing has changed for them from prior years, except that now their report card has the 1 to 4 that they've already been getting in their classrooms anyways. But their transcripts will still have that translation until they've graduated. We have two people online that have questions.
Yes,
Sure.
please.
All right, so we're gonna let some of the people who have questions online answer. So first we have Rick Lovett. So you should now have permission to talk, Rick.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had a couple of questions, actually. The first one, and I know you've all touched on it, you're saying the three parts, the essay, the letter of recommendation, actually a minor, a sub question, if you will. Can you have more than one letter of recommendation? Can you have many? And then also the third part is the transcript. I know you say that you weigh them equally. But generally speaking, does one tend to outweigh the other?
Questions? I don't know if somebody wants to answer
Let's
that.
jump in.
I don't know if he's on
So
screen.
just so I'm clear, it sounded like you had kind of three questions, sort of clarifying what the parts were that they look for in admissions, asking if they could have more than one letter of recommendation, and then asking sort of truly, do you weigh the transcripts equally, or is there one that at the end of the day gets weighed sort of more than another? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. That's fine.
Okay.
So I can touch on how we do it at Keene State. To answer the first two questions, did you have them?
No, no, I'm sorry. I started
What are
to-
the parts of your
The
admissions
parts, yep.
process, and then can you have more than one letter?
Yeah, so parts of the admissions process, transcript, letter of recommendation, the application itself, which usually includes an essay. For Keene State, we only require one letter of recommendation. I've heard of 2, 3, 4, and 5 letters of recommendations, depending on the school. But for the most part, the two schools that I've worked for, actually both local schools, I worked at Franklin Pierce for a long time as well. Both of those schools only required one letter of recommendation. Was the second one?
And then with the transcripts, at the end of the day, is there one type that you would weight as better than the other, or sort of give more credence to than another?
Yeah, I mean, every school district is going to be different. But in terms of a Conan High School kid, we weigh that every Conan High School kid pretty much the same because of what their curriculum is. But a Conan High School kid is going to be different than, I'm just going to use local schools just for your guys' reference, a Conval kid, a Keene High kid. Those are going to be, they're just different schools. So they're weighed a little differently just based on the competitiveness within that school, which is something that we look at as admissions counselors, kind of how those school districts work. Sometimes private or boarding schools are different. So we kind of juggle those and look at those holistically. As we've mentioned many times, that word's come up a lot, but it's not just a cut and dry, answer. I guess you kind of look at everything all at once, but the Conant kid is going to be compared to their Conant, colleagues. So.
If I could, the other thing I would add to what Steve said too, is that we look at all three. I mean, of course, the transcript is fairly important because that's going to tell us at a very foundational level, at least, what a student's academic preparedness is within their coursework. And so that gives us a foundation to go off of the other supplemental materials. But what the transcript doesn't necessarily tell us, and the reason why it's important to have letters of recommendation and essays, and Rick, why it really is a holistic process, is the transcript isn't going to tell me why a student struggled in math. It's not going to tell me why they had a bad year in geometry. It's not going to tell me, and then they got an A in Algebra 2 next year. It's not going to answer that question for me, but a letter of recommendation might. And so it may say, this student really is an academically excellent student, and X, Y, or Z happened either, in their personal life or in their academic life during this year, and that should be considered when we review that transcript. So to answer your question, I think ultimately is that all three are important. The transcript is important to know academic preparedness, but the other three really give us a background on the student to ensure that we have all the information that we need to interpret that transcript appropriately.
So were we able to answer all of your questions?
Yes, and I apologize for dumping them like that. I would like to say one thing, and I understand that this probably isn't going to be as much of an issue for my son, because he's a senior. But the 1 to 4 grading system, I think it's a fantastic idea. Don't get me wrong. I think it does tend to expand, the view of the student and all. I just think having done many employee evaluations with similar 1 to 4, 1 to 5 grading systems, there's a lot of subjectivity that's involved, and just the teachers need to be cognizant of that and very careful of that too. So.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. Again, we appreciate you dumping the questions like you did and sharing them. And there's no question tonight that's difficult in the sense that we don't want to hear it, because if you're having these questions, Rick, or earlier when our in-person audience has it, that means other people have the questions as well. And we want to be able to answer those. So I appreciate you being willing to share all of those, as well as that last piece. Thank you very much. Did we have one other one, Nick?
Yeah. All right, so now we'll have Amy.
Hi, I actually I have a question because I'm coming off of this as a person who just had a daughter that is gone off to college this year, but also have a son who's a sophomore. And for us personally, because of the way things worked for us, we weren't able to have the support that we would have liked with any kind of financial aid. So we relied very heavily on merit-based scholarship. And a lot of the merit-based scholarships through the colleges are based upon GPA. We found that we were very lucky, and my daughter was able to get a good merit scholarship. But looking now forward, the translation of the grades, I'm concerned about that affecting GPA in the sense of what we'd be able to get for assistance and how that would affect it. So do the colleges look at, when they're doing merit scholarships, I know for my daughter's college they did it, but in other colleges, do they look at it differently with a 1 to 4 grading based on merit scholarship versus what they would do, or do they translate it into a 100% grade in order to award that?
So just so I'll clarify the question. It sounds like what you're asking is if, as we make this transition and our GPA shifts to a 1 to 4 system to match our grades, are you asking if the colleges represented here would unwind that GPA back to a 0 to 100 for merit-based scholarships, or if that would somehow otherwise affect that? Is that kind of what you're asking, Amy?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll make a really short answer to that. Yes, we will. We will unwind it and give the student, a number. GPA, at Keene State, we use a 4.0 scale. So we would put them somewhere in that 4.0 scale with that, and then award them a merit scholarship based on that. But again, working with, the guidance office to kind of correlate what that is going to be. That's something that we'll work on, to make sure that we have the correct correlation. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing. We look at our merit depending, no matter if they're on the 100 scale, we convert that to a 4.0 scale. That is what we use for our merit-based. We don't use test-based scores at the University of Southern Maine. So some schools might consider SAT or ACT. We very much depend on GPA as our way of doing merit-based aid, as well as, external or internal scholarships that depend on other things, whether it's music or whatever they're interested in. But for merit-based aid, typically, just like Keene, we will look at it on a 4.0, but we're doing that for schools that are on a whole wide range of scales, because no school is going to be exactly the same, even if they are on that 100-point scale. I've seen them on 5, 8, 12-point scales. So you have a wide variety that you're converting into this standardized way of looking at it to give out the best possible aid.
I would just add that UNH does it very similar to USM.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Are there any other questions from the audience in person or online or anything else from our admissions folks that you wanted to share, things that you feel like you, again, sort of like what Kim was saying, things that you thought we'd ask and didn't, sort of any closing remarks in that way before we wrap up?
I guess just this is Nick, handy again, just for the people online, hand raise feature to be able to have us address you. Can be found on the bottom of whatever screen you're on.
Hey, well, I just want to say once again, thank you to the college admissions folks for being here. Thank you for the fantastic questions tonight. I think that we're, again, making the right decisions for the right reasons for our learners and continuing to partner with families, make sure that we're all learning together as we need to, and making sure that the systems are clear and the communication channels open, I think is going to continue to be very important. And I very much appreciate our partnerships with these folks as well as with our families. So thank you again. Thanks for being here tonight. We will make this recording available on our YouTube channel alongside the 3 previous ones that we've done. So if you have missed any portion of our kind of journey on this, I would definitely encourage going back to those YouTube videos and watching some of our previous forums that got into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty details. Again, thank you all for being here tonight and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.